every Hashira's death in Demon Slayer, because their lives were legendary, but their death made them unforgettable. Next up is Kyojuro Rengoku. In a way, Rengoku didn't even die in the demon's hands. He's the sole reason for his death. The Flame Hashira was easily one of the strongest members of the Demon Slayer Corps, and the most badass part about him was that he trained himself from the start. We first met him in the Mugen Train arc, where he joined Tanjiro, Inosuke, and Zenitsu to take down Enmu. After the group finally defeated Enmu, it seemed like the danger was over, but then Akaza appeared and went straight for Tanjiro. Rengoku immediately stepped in to protect him, and the two clashed in an absolutely brutal fight. At first it looked like Rengoku was holding his own, but injury after injury piled up. Eventually Akaza landed a devastating blow straight through Rengoku's stomach. Even then, Rengoku didn't give up. As the sun began to rise, he grabbed onto Akaza with one arm and tried to finish him with the other, determined to take the demon down with him. His grip was so strong that Akaza had to tear his arms off just to escape. Shortly after this, Rengoku finally succumbed to his injuries, but the way he went out, fighting to the very last breath, made his death one of the most unforgettable moments in anime history. But here's a hot take. If instead of training by himself, Rengoku actually trained and learned properly, dude would have mastered flame breathing and maybe he could have cut down Akaza without dying. Kanae Kocho. If she did just one more thing before her death, she might still be alive. When it comes to deaths, Kanae had quite a mysterious one. We only really get a glimpse of it in the flashback. We didn't get to see the battle or why she even died. What we do know is that she was mortally wounded during a fight with Doma, but luckily the sunrise forced him to retreat before he could finish her off. Her death became the driving force behind Shinobu's deep hatred for demons. Even though Kanae had wished for Shinobu to leave the Demon Slayer Corps and live a peaceful normal life, Shinobu couldn't let it go. Instead, she dedicated herself to avenging her sister. Shinobu Kocho, who's basically the symbol of toxic femininity even in her death. Shinobu was the insect Hashira and the sister of Kanae Kocho. Ever since her sister's death, she had a deep hatred for demons. One of her missions in life was to find the demon who had caused her sister's death. When Shinobu first ran into Doma, he was literally in the middle of eating one of his own followers. She tried to save the person, but Doma killed him instantly. Still, Shinobu fought back. She managed to stab him with her poison-coated blade. Problem was that Doma adapted almost immediately, breaking down the poison inside his body like it was nothing. He then went on the offensive, landing brutal blows, piercing her lung, breaking her collarbone, and even damaging her ribs. By all accounts, she should have been dead right there. But to Doma's surprise, Shinobu stood back up, bloodied and barely holding on, yet still determined to fight. She launched herself at him again, as she managed to pierce his neck, but once again the poison failed. In the end, Doma overpowered her and absorbed her completely. But here's a twist. Shinobu had been preparing for this fight all along. Before facing Doma, she had been ingesting small amounts of wisteria flower every day. By the time she was absorbed, her body contained 37 kilograms worth of it. That's nearly 700 times the lethal dose for a demon. Even in death, she turned herself into a weapon. Jigoro Kuwajima. This is probably one of the deaths that's absolutely useless and at the same time absolutely necessary for the story. Jigoro was a former Thunder Hashira and the mentor of both Zenitsu and Kaigaku. His story ended in a really tragic way, when he discovered that one of his own students had turned into a demon. The shame was unbearable. In his despair, he decided to take his own life. But the heartbreaking part is that he did it completely alone. Traditionally during seppuku, someone else is there to end it quickly by cutting off the head. But Jigoro had no one. That meant he was left to suffer, bleeding out in pain for hours. So technically, the kill just shows how deep Jigoro's character is, but it doesn't impact the direct flow of the story. At the same time, without that death, our boy Zenitsu wouldn't have had the growth he needed to do what he did in the Infinity Castle. Moichiro Tokito. He may have been the youngest Hashira, but his final fight raised a question even Kokushibo couldn't ignore. Moichiro Tokito was the youngest of all the Hashira, just 14 years old, and he held the title of Mist Hashira. Despite his age, he was incredibly gifted, even managing to awaken the Demon Slayer mark. His fight against Kokushibo was nothing short of brutal. Right at the start, he lost an arm, but instead of backing down, he kept fighting. almost immediately after Kokushibo pinned him to the wall using his own sword. Even then, Moichiro tried to pull the blade out and jump back into the battle. What's even more impressive is that with all these injuries and only one hand left, he still managed to save Sanemi from what could have been certain death. Pushing past the pain, he fought on, turning his blade red and even landing a critical hit on Kokushibo. In fact, it was the wound that Moichiro gave Kokushibo that started crumbling away first. The fight also made Kokushibo ask himself a very important question. Once he saw the hideous form that he had transformed into, is this the face of a samurai? And that question was the beginning of the end. But Moichiro's wounds were far too severe. Not long after Kokushibo finally fell, Moichiro also passed away, having given everything he had in that fight. Mitsuri Kanroji. Nakame might have overpowered her, but it was in that exact moment that Mitsuri's true role in the story began. The love Hashira actually started out by studying flame breathing under Rengoku, before eventually creating her own unique style, love breathing. When the Hashira faced off against the new Upper Moon 4, Nakame, Mitsuri didn't hesitate. The moment she spotted her, she launched 2 attacks back to back. But Nakame's Blood Demon art blocked her both times, and Mitsuri quickly found herself on the defensive. For a while, Nakame had her completely overpowered, leaving Mitsuri injured and struggling. That's when Yushiro stepped in. Using one of his paper talismans, he managed to take control of Nakame by literally drilling his fingers into her skull. Thanks to that, Mitsuri was freed up to join the final fight against Muzan himself. Despite already being hurt, Mitsuri fought with everything she had. She stood her ground against Muzan's overwhelming strength, taking heavy injuries in the process, even losing both her arms while trying to bring him down. But true to her title, she never stopped fighting with heart until the very end. Once Muzan was defeated, she passed away due to her severe injuries and blood loss. She passed away in Obanai's arms, after making a wish to Obanai expressing that she wanted to be married to him in her next life. In the end, her role wasn't just about fighting until death. It was about proving that even in the darkest battle, love could become a weapon of strength. Obanai Iguro. Losing his sight should have ended his battle right there. But Obanai had a secret weapon no other Hashira did. The Serpent Hashira had some of his biggest moments during the Infinity Castle arc. He fought alongside Mitsuri against the upper rank 4 Nakame. At first, the two of them were completely overwhelmed. Nakame's Blood Demon art had them trapped and injured. But then Yushiro stepped in, managing to take control of Nakame, which gave Obanai and Mitsuri the chance to rejoin the bigger battle. From there, Obanai went to face Muzan himself. He fought in both the initial clash and the final phase of the battle, even after being blinded and suffering severe injuries. What's wild is that he kept fighting by relying on his serpent, Kaburamaru, who acted as his eyes. Despite everything, Obanai didn't stop. He fought right alongside Tanjiro, giving him the support he needed to unleash his sun breathing techniques against Muzan. Together with the other Hashira, Obanai pushed through the pain, doing everything he could to stall Muzan until the sun finally rose and ended the fight once and for all. Obanai's final moments came right after Mitsuri confessed her love for him, telling him that she wished they could be together and married in their next life. Not long after hearing those words, Obanai succumbed to his injuries. The blood loss and wounds he'd taken in the fight against Muzan were simply too much, and with Mitsuri by his side, he took his last breath. Gyome Himajima. If Kokushibo was the pinnacle of demons, Gyome might have been the closest thing humanity had in response. Himejima, the stone Hashira, was easily the strongest Hashira of his time. His stone breathing techniques were nothing short of devastating, and we really got to see just how powerful he was during his fight against Upper Moon 1 Kokushibo. Despite Kokushibo's terrifying speed and power, Gyome kept up with him, blow for blow. At one point, he even managed to slice off Kokushibo's arm, creating the perfect opening for Moichiro to land a critical strike. When Gyome's weapon turned red, the damage it inflicted on Kokushibo's body was immense, so much so that it helped lead to Kokushibo's downfall. But his true test came during the battle against Muzan. Fighting alongside the surviving members of the Demon Slayer Corps, Gyome once again pushed himself to the absolute limit. He turned his weapon red once again to maximize the damage he could do to Muzan, and despite taking brutal injuries, he refused to back down until the very end. Gyome stood as the core's strongest shield. Just like Mitsuri and Obanai, Gyome was pushed to his absolute limit in the battle against Muzan. The fight was so brutal that he even lost one of his legs along the way. And when Muzan finally went down, the surviving members of the Demon Slayer Corps rushed to Gyome's side, desperate to save him. They tried to give him medicine to patch him up, but Gyome refused. Calmly and quietly, he accepted that his time had come, and within moments, the strongest Hashira took his final breath. And as tragic as the Hashira deaths were, they weren't even the most brutal in Demon Slayer. Some deaths go way beyond heartbreaking into nightmare fuel.